Yo, what up? Sploogy the Rat Hog on the beat! About to tell you boys about the Ming Dynasty, you heard? Well, probably it's the name of the track. The year is 1638, East Asia anew. Empire has recently risen the great. Qing Dynasty, founded by the Manchu, people who are led by Yuan Taiji, an aging conqueror in the young fool's palace in the imperial city, and mock them the capital. His ninth son is born. That child will grow up to be the first emperor to rule from Beijing, officially replacing the once great Chinese Ming Empire with the man she would sing. Dynasty the last dynasty to rule over China. That man was emperor. Born under the personal name of Fallen, the future leader was son to the Qing emperor and his temporary consort, the daughter of a Mongol princess who would later play a significant role in ruling China. Not much is known about his early childhood, but he certainly grew up in the imperial city of Mukden around the wealth and power that his father Huang Taiji had amassed in his rule in 1643. The emperor, however, died, designating no heir. Most, like his father, knew Rahatship before him to succeed in the leadership of the Qing dynasty. The different factions in the courts either supported Dorkin or Hoka, the late emperor's half-brother and eldest son respectively. To resolve a dispute, a state council was held, at the issue of which it was decided that a 5-year-old Fulan was to be the next emperor. Dorgan and another Manchu nobleman, Jurgalag, would, however, be co-regents until Fulan was old enough to rule. Falling's mother also became an empress dowager, holding influence in the court. The boy ascended to the throne on the 8th of October, 1643, becoming the emperor Shanja Jurgalang. One of the two co-regents had little interest in state affairs and conceded almost all his power to Torgel in 1644. The same year, an alleged conspiracy by Hager Elder, brother to Emperor Xuanzhu, was discovered. This gave Dadong the opportunity to eliminate the pro-Hager faction once and for all, consolidating his own power even more on the geopolitical level. The Qing authorities were about to conquer China. Beijing, were the Trogdon emperor of the Chinese Ming Dynasty, ruled was an arm's reach for the great Manchu Aids Banner Army. But while the Manchu soldiers were preparing to march on the Chinese capital city, an unexpected event had happened. China had been plagued with domestic rebellions for several years. A charismatic rebel leader from the west named Leeds or Chun had managed to defeat the Ming armies and marched on Beijing in April 1644, overtaking the Manchus. But Trogon, emperor of the Ming Dynasty, was completely surrounded. Even if he managed to defeat Leeds or Chang, he would not resist the following Manchu attack. During the night after Leeds or Chang lay siege to Beijing, a eunuch opened the gates of the city, allowing Leeds or Chang's troops to overrun the city. The city rapidly resigned. The Chinese Ming emperor hanged himself to a tree in the imperial city. Wow. The following day, symbolically marking the end of the once great Ming Dynasty, Leeds or Chun then occupied the capital city. His forces severely mistreated the population. The Ming Dynasty had fallen, but a new enthusiastic army had stood it. Beijing replacing it. In the Manchu camp, Han, Chinese advisors to Torgel, who had defeated and joined the Qing dynasty, saw this as an opportunity. If the Qing dynasty could crush Leeds or Qiang's rebellions, it could present itself as the savior of imperial power and of Beijing and rule over China with legitimacy. But Qing soldiers saddled up. Although the Ming was technically overthrown, it still held armies across China. Between Mukden and Beijing stood the Shanghai Pass. The Great Wall in this huge garrison who sank Wei Wan, one of the last great generals of the Ming, stood his ground, surrounded by the Qing in the north or Leeds or Chong in the west, as the Manchus had done with most Chinese officials since the beginning of their conquest. They tried to convince Wu San-gui to defect and join the Qing. He had no choice and reluctantly accepted to join the Qing. but many, contrarily to many defectors, his loyalty to the Manchu invaders was weak. Li's, or Qiang's, forces finally arrived, reaching Shanghai Pass on the 27th of May. The battle could begin. Well, some ways, forces fought for hours, alone against Li Daizhong, suffering heavy casualties. It is possible that the thought of them purposely delayed his attack to make sure Sang Boi's forces would greatly be reduced. After the battle, maliciously waiting for a few hours, Doran finally dispatched his Manchu cavalry. Now reinforced, the ex-Ming alongside the king's soldiers were able to defeat Li's or Chang's army, whose remaining forces could only flee back to Beijing. The outcome of the battle was a decisive tactical victory for the Manchus, whose forces suffered minor losses, contrary to Li Zhichong and Will. Some way back in the capital city, Li's or Tong stayed for 42 days. My bad. He only stayed for 42. Until he decided to escape back west of a portion of his army, fearing the advancing Manchu forces before leaving. On the 4th of June, the rebel soldiers took as much wealth as they could carry and set fire to the palace. A couple thousand rebel soldiers could only stay behind and were slaughtered by the Beijing population. The following day, a council of city elders and officials prepared to receive their liberators in their perspective. They expected war some wait to arrive with the young prince, soon to be emperor. For the Ming Dynasty, and all would be back in order, but to their disbelief it was thought upon a Manchu cavalier, hardened by years of fighting, on the saddle, who appeared with this fellow Manchu soldiers. There was really nothing the Chinese could do, so it accepted that seeing the dynasty's authority, the Ottoman will have the cautious of treating the population well. He forbade his soldiers from pillaging the city. That's pretty cool of him to forbid his soldiers from doing that. It's a pretty fucked up thing to do, so. Finally, in October 1644, the young soldier emperor was escorted from the Mug into Beijing. He would soon be guided into concluding sacrificial ceremonies at the altar of heaven, claiming the mandate of heaven. Shunda was not simply the king emperor anymore, he was emperor of all of China. But the young boy was still in his 6 years old and controlled by the regent Orgel, who gradually grasped more power. A massive migration of members of the 8 banners began, as each one's prominent soldiers and nobles moved to Beijing, now the capital of the Qing Dynasty. Man, attention spiked out between the locals and new inhabitants, as farming lands around the city were given to the Qing nobles, making their original Chinese owners only tenants. What thought of them, however, managed to calm the population down with tax submissions and major building programs to facilitate relations between the Manchus and Han Chinese. Marriages between the two were legalized and encouraged under certain conditions. The Imperial Civil Service examination was established. The main subjects of it would remain the same for several years. How can Manchus and Han Chinese be unified so their hearts are the same and they work together without division? In the following years, the Shunter Emperor was growing up. Dorgan would conduct the subjugation of the rest of China in the west. Li Zhichong still ruled over the Xian region in the south. The remnants of the Ming Dynasty clinged on to power with the remaining armies. In search of one province, the banded kingdom of Dashi was controlled by Zhan Shinto in the North Gansu region. Muslim rebels rose up against the Qing, claiming to want to restore the Ming in December 1650. In an event which shake the scene, Court Dorkin suddenly died in a hunting accident. He may have been assassinated. Nonetheless, the 13-year-old son, Kirk, had now seized the opportunity to rid himself of the regency. The protocol faction in the court was still influenced, preparing to take charge of the government, but Sure Gallen on the other co-regent came back into the picture, pushed by supporters discontent with Darwin's rule, mainly the Manchu officials. Named all boy and song, Zaha, he managed to abolish the regency, cutting short the ambitions of the protocol faction. All boy Shaksaha were later rewarded with influential positions. Yo, we about to take a quick break. It's halftime. Yo, we back! Hope you boys enjoyed that break. We about to get right back into the Ming Dynasty again. Thornton was posthumously stripped of his titles and his faction swept away. Shundru the young adolescent could now rule on his own as the son of heaven. One of the first edicts was to declare he would put an end to corruption within the officials, a statement that was so discontent within many of the unscrupulous officials who would hinder his reforms in the future. The first marriage was arranged for the young emperor in 1651, but he would repeat. Yet his emperors 2 years later, a new marriage was arranged in 1654. Although Chandra also disliked the second empress, he was unable to motor they would have no children together. Well, though the emperor was young, he was quite active in political move. He invited the 5th Dalai Lama, living in Lhasa, leader of Tibetan Buddhism and recent unifier of religious and secular rule in Tibet, to a state visit in Beijing. Both Chandra's grandfather and father, nor had she and Han Taiji, had been patrons of Tibetan Buddhism and several Mongol tribes that had not been subdued yet due to king rule, or followers of Tibetan Buddhism answering to the Dalai Lama. Therefore, Yu-Jur can gain great influence from the state visit. In preparation for the event, the emperor ordered the construction of the wide Dagaba in Beijing to honor his guests. It still stands today. The 5th Dalai Lama departed from Lhasa with 3,000 men and traveled for 9 months, finally arriving in Beijing in 1653. The two leaders met symbolically, marking the beginning of relations between Tibet and the Qing Empire. After the visits, Chandra drifted the Dalai Lama with a golden seal as a symbol of his authority. Of Tibet, the Dalai Lama declined and began returning to his capital city of Lhasa. Chandra then dispatched men to bring him the seal, and this time the Dalai Lama reluctantly accepted the gift. Reportedly, the Tibetan inscriptions on the seal had been made by a bad translator and were a poor translation and broken Tibet. The 5th Dalai Lama soon discarded the golden seal and made his own. Another religion was starting to play a significant role in the mid-17th century. Christian Catholic missionaries from the Society of Jesus, more famously known as the Jesuits, thrived in the Asian continent, having already established relations with the Ming Dynasty before it collapsed. They now reached to the Qing. Their knowledge in domains such as astronomy and mathematics greatly fascinated the king court, much like the Ming before one of the missionaries, a German Jesuit from the Holy Roman Empire named Johann Adam Schon von Bell, who had been given official positions in astronomy by Tolkien before his death. Probably a different Tolkien than the one you're thinking of. He developed a personal relation with the young Chandra emperor. It is reported the emperor affectionately called Schon von Bell Martha, the Manchu word meaning grandfather. He regularly consulted him for guidance. The Jesuit received many favors from Chandra, who gave him permission not to bow in his presence, gave him land to build a church, and allowed him to adopt the son, out of worry that she would die without an heir. The missionary would have not been able to convert the Qing emperor, as he embraced Chan Buddhism in 1657, becoming a devout practitioner of Chandra. Also adopted many aspects of Chinese culture. He enjoyed opera and theater, indulged in calligraphy, and read many Chinese texts and poetry. This was criticized by many in the Manchu nobility, but war was still going on in the empire. For a few years, the Tsardom of Russia had been exploring and settling in Siberia. The 1650s, Russian Cossacks tried to subdue several Siberian tribes that were already paying tribute to the Qing Empire. Since Chandra's father, Huan Taiji, had conquered the Amur River Valley, Manchu soldiers were dispatched to investigate Russian activities in the area, but they were driven back by the Cossack leader, Oyufri Stepanov. In 1654, the Russians were beginning to anger the Qing authorities. In 1658, the Manchu great shareholders set sail on the Amur River. With 40 ships and intact, Stepanov, his men, most of the Cossacks, were killed, captured, or managed to escape. For now, the Russians had been driven off. Shundru, the leading Ming Dynasty, can now focus on pacifying China, where anti-King sentiment frozen some regions of the south of the nation was still in control. The remnants of the Ming Dynasty on the Emperor Yongle, the Qingle forces, whose army was composed of more and more Chinese soldiers, created a new division separate from the 8-banner army. The Green Standard Army was created with Chinese officers, mostly extinct defectors, and Chinese soldiers, mostly captured Ming forces at first aid. The banner slowly became more of a reserve and elite troop, intervening in emergency clank to finally quell pro-Ming resistance in the south at Sink, or dispatch Hong control, who I've talked about in my other song. Just kidding. His men in 1653, now part of the Green Army Standard during the last years of the Yongle Emperor, had fled around South China, was now entrenched in the town of Kunming. General Han Chang control slowly built up his force. In 1659, besieged the Ming capital, the last bastion of the court. The Yongle Emperor was forced to escape out of China into Burma, where he found asylum. The Ming Dynasty scorch was all over. Practically all of China was on the rule of their team. Fujian province, where the Drunk family of Ming loyalists desperately clung to power, and several small regions still resisted Truder, was known to have a very bad temper. When the Drunk family opposed resistance in the south and threatened to take the advantage of besieging the town of Nanjing, the emperor reportedly got furious and destroyed his own throne with a sword. Holy shit. Only calming down with the intervention of Jasut Char and news that Drung it was repelled. It is noted that Tundra's health had always been very poor after his favorite consort Dong Hua died in 1660. Chandra was overwhelmed with grief, much like his father had been in a similar situation. In the next month, his state worsened as he spent a lot of time praying. Having become a Tao-Chun Buddhist practitioner, on the 2nd of February 1661, the Seeing Emperor contracted smallpox that the Han Chinese knew well, but that did not exist in Manchuria. The Manchu people therefore had no immunity against it. 2 days later, on his deathbed, he was asked to give his will. On the 5th of February, the emperor finally died at the age of 22. His will was most likely modified for the men and nobles and his mother, the Empress Dowager, when it was made public. It stated that the emperor regretted having embraced Chinese culture as he had done, and designated a third son, a 7-year-old, to be the next emperor. He would rule under the name Kangxi. As he was too young, a regency would be put in his place, controlled by the 4 men who noble sewn in a balloon. Their buoyant skills are the last 2, having already amassed a lot of power during Chandra's reign. A few rumors spread that the emperor had not died, but actually retired to a monastery to devote himself to monastic life, or had been disposed after a coup. Nonetheless, after a period of mourning, his corpse was interred in the Eastern Scene tombs over 100 kilometers away from Beijing. During his short rule, Sun Tzu certainly broke the conquering tradition of his father and grandfather, who had mounted the Manchu state. Instead of ruling from atop the saddle of a horse, a bow in hand, the 3rd Manchu emperor was the first to govern from Beijing, using a brush to promulgate edicts. He fought corruption, oversaw the final destruction of the Ming Dynasty, and the virtual elimination of all resistance from China proper. His son Kangxi would become the greatest emperor of the Qing Dynasty. Well, I hope you learned something today. I didn't.